A human with a full stomach has many problems, and a human with an empty stomach has but one. I like that expression. It makes me think in this film of really how blessed we are, I think, to have many options, to have many problems in that sense, to have full grocery store shelves, and indeed to be having the discussion about the kind of food we want and to embrace variety and options and those kinds of things. I was having a chat with Scott Kennedy before this film was presented, and he said, that's not a film about food, actually, or GMOs or whatever. He said it's a film about science. It's a film about evidence and about critical thinking and the ability to do these in very complex issues. You know, the world is fairly gray. I have a confession to make, in particular to Dylan. Those who know me know that I get it wrong. I get it wrong quite often, and especially with names and titles. And so I often call people by the wrong name, and I think people might have been searching their emails. I think I did call it Beyond the Plate in an email saying, you know, whatever, the preview. I didn't figure that there was something close enough to Before the Plate. So my apologies, Dylan. It generated more discussion. And I think that was entirely my fault, and I thought, holy smokes, that's neat. It's a different trailer than we saw last night. Very different. In fact, I had no idea what it was, and I thought you were pulling a fast one on us. My bad. Sorry about that, everybody. My name's Tyler Whale, by the way, at least I think it is. I come from an organization called Ontario Agri-Food Technologies. We helped organize this event. The other organizing, just a few words of introduction and thank you. The other organizing members of the panel, or not of the panel, but of the committee, were RCI Science, so the Royal Canadian Society, the Royal Canadian Science Institute, which is, it presents public events for all ages, and since about 170 years ago, 1849, they've worked towards a goal of an informed public that embraces science to build a stronger Canada. We had the University of Waterloo as a key host, a key sponsor. It's too bad Trevor Charles couldn't be here. He's a professor here at the university. Wonderful guy, really strong science advocate. We do have Carly here instead, wherever Carly is, as a rep, but they were key members, and what do I need to say about the University of Waterloo? Innovative, impressive people, and another impressive Canadian institution. Life Science Ontario. LSO is a member-driven organization that represents and promotes the province's vibrant and diverse life sciences sector. Life science encompasses all science related to living organisms, be it human, animal, or plant. Ontario has a diverse group of life science stakeholders that includes companies operating in a variety of sectors, including biopharmaceutical, agriculture, agri-food, the bioeconomy, animal health, medical devices, environmental technologies, and many more. And CropLife Canada. CropLife Canada represents the Canadian manufacturers, developers, and distributors of pest control and modern plant breeding products. The organization's primary focus is on providing tools to help farmers be more productive and more sustainable, but we also develop products for use in a wide range of non-agricultural settings, including urban green spaces, public health settings, and transportation corridors. And then, of course, there's my organization, OAFT. It's a very small organization in Guelph, Ontario, that helps facilitate the viability of ag technology companies around the world. And you know, part of our job is to get out there and talk about science. We've got a real laser focus on one word only, and I'd say that's sustainability. So to me, that's the one that we can't ruin. So a few thank yous. Andrea, bravo. Just give the audience a wave. She largely made this happen. I mean, we all helped her. But the hundreds and maybe thousands of emails that go in and organizing an event like this, it's no small task. And Andrea Murray, so the two Andreas in our group, Andrea sort of coordinates everything that it's seamless. And I'm sure she was steaming that Beyond the Plate came on. Again, my bad. Who else to thank here? You guys. You know, everybody's committing their time on a Wednesday night to come out and see a very cool documentary, I must admit. But at the same time, I hope you're willing to stay and exhaust the panel with some really good questions, some really thorough discussion, and again, some respectful conversation, some respectful dialogue. And is there anybody else? Oh, our panel. Our panel will be introduced momentarily here, but they've traveled from far and wide, including somebody featured in the film, Motlatsi Musi, came to Canada for the first time on Monday. We gave him a toque, a pair of gloves, and a coat. He watched his first game of hockey today, and really he's here to give the perspective of the developing world farmer. So very important to have you here, and the other panelists we will see. You're also all important, but you didn't travel quite as far, so we'll give that credit. I've got a very token thank you gift. It's a bit of a shameless plug for a token technology, I would say. This is something you can all relate to. It's a coffee mug. We all have probably 13 or 40 of them or so in our cupboards. This one was developed at Trent University. It's called Prolong, and you can look it up and buy it on the website. I do not automatically get commissioned for doing this. But it's an example of a technology that was developed here. It's got a phase change oil inside the case of the cup. It's soybean oil grown in Ontario. And again, probably with some assurance, it's genetically modified. That phase change oil has been made to accept heat from your hot beverage, and it melts, and then it pushes that heat back into the beverage. So it melts and cools your 100-degree tea or 80-degree coffee to a drinkable 55 in a matter of seconds. So it's kind of a cool little thing, and one of these innovations, again, that we can be proud of. Like I said, it's token. It's something that we could demonstrate, and maybe you guys could all consider a Valentine's gift or something like that, looking up Prolong coffee cups. With that, I think everything has been said that I need to. I'm going to call on our distinguished, or our privileged, I suppose, what's the word, moderator. And your name, Kelly. Got it right. Kelly Hodgins is from the University of Guelph's Arrell Food Institute. And from now on in, take it away, Kelly.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone, for having me. Thank you for sticking around. I'm really looking forward to this conversation in this part of the evening. So yeah, as it was mentioned, my name is Kelly Hodgins. I work for the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph, which is a center for food research, innovation, and communication. And we aim to be, we are a center that hosts dialogue around important and timely food systems topics and issues, and we really try to hold space for conversations such as this. As a center, we are objective and unbiased, and really just wanting to hold space for really important conversations, so I'm looking forward to that tonight. Personally as well, I come from that same sort of background. I come from a conventional dairy farm background, but for the past 12 years have been small-scale organic farming on the coast of BC. So kind of wearing both hats, and hopefully, in my head, a lot of different perspectives when it comes to these topics. So looking forward to the conversation again. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up the panelists and give them a chance to introduce themselves as well. Okay, so before we sort of introduce the flow for the evening, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. So if you want to start down at the end, Maria, give it a go.
Hi, my name is Maria Trainer. I'm Managing Director of Science and Regulatory Affairs for CropLife Canada, based in Ottawa.
Good evening, my name is Greg Hannam. I'm a crop farmer just outside of Guelph. We grow corn, wheat, and soybeans on my farm. I grow GM crops and some non-GM crops on my farm, and I'm pretty happy to be here. I'm actually pretty happy right now to be up here because, you know, we all stared at a movie for an hour, hour and a half, and now I get to take my head and turn like this in both directions and stretch it, and you still have to look forward. So.
Hello, everybody. My name is Motlatsi Musi. I'm a farmer from South Africa, livestock and grain producer. I want to thank you all, Canadians. I used to be a farm laborer since I was very young, homeless. But thank you for criticizing a wrong regime. I am no longer a laborer, but I own 21 hectares of land. And thanks for you for the contribution again. Nelson Mandela died a free man. Thank you.
My name is Carol Culhane. I'm a professional home economist. I've worked in the food industry for 40 years, and the past 25 of those years operating my own business called International Food Focus. And we conduct regulatory compliance services and market assessments for agri-food organizations.
You all met me before. I'm Scott, and I'm the filmmaker, and I get to do my follow-up. Yes?
Sure.
Okay. You have cameras anywhere? All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for sticking around. So if we can do, again, this very unscientific poll, but it's fun to do. By a show of hands, after seeing the film, how many people still feel that they have concerns for their safety or the safety of the planet with the current GMOs on the market, case by case, going forward? Hands up. Okay, less than before. And how many people feel that the farmers in Kenya and Uganda should have the right to choose a GE or GMO fix for their banana wilt problem? Does anybody feel that they should not have the right to choose GMO? One? Oh, is that one up there? It's okay, raise your hand if that's how you feel. Great, and we'd love to hear from you too. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we begin, I also just want to acknowledge the land that we are upon today and the traditional keepers of that land. So as we are talking about farmland and soil and sustainability, it is always really important to keep in mind those who have been stewarding this land for 15,000 years. And in this space particularly, we're talking about the Adwandran, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee First Nations. So today, the space that we are meeting on is still the home to many Indigenous First Nations people from across Turtle Island, and we are really grateful to have this space to gather and converse upon. So I guess we have about an hour, and what we are going to be doing, the process for this is we will be passing mics through the audience, so if you have a question, raise your hand and Andy will be able to bring you a mic. We also will be passing around index cards for you to write down a question if you prefer that, and we'll take those up here. We'll sort of try to keep it to one question per audience member to try to move through, because we do have a very large audience tonight. And I will try to keep these guys moving at a pretty quick pace as well. Last night when we did this, we got kind of carried away. We like to talk a lot, and we have a lot to say on these topics. So, but with respect to you guys, we do want to hear a lot of different questions. So for those purposes, we're going to try to move through questions and answers pretty quickly to get a whole diversity of perspectives. So thank you for that consideration. So I think without further ado, for the next hour or so, we're going to kick it right off into questions. So if there's anyone who does have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and Andy will come and grab you.
And if you guys don't mind, if you could tell us your name and what you do, it's always interesting to know. Mic surfing. What fun. We'll end the night with karaoke, everybody, don't worry.
Well, good evening, and thank you for an excellent documentary.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a salesman, so I've been selling for 35 years, and I look at everything from nice marketing, nice touch, color, that sort of perspective.
Sure.
Over that time, I've worked 25 years in the chemical industry. The first year that I started, I ended up in St. Mary's Hospital, turning blue because I mixed the wrong chemicals in a trial that day. Oops. Nobody knew those chemicals shouldn't be used that way, and I was happy to share that with my management team, and they stopped doing that. But nobody put me in harm's way. They didn't know. It was a fluke that I had run 2 production trials at dissimilar factories the same day. It seems to be going in and out. But anyways, what they learned was something they didn't know. Science at that time did not know. So in the presentation, you're saying, trust the science. But has history not shown us perpetually, as we learn every day, tomorrow science will tell us something new? And my question, it came back to funding. Right now, all the studies and everything that is saying GMOs are completely safe, the funding is coming from the Monsantos. No?
Not 100% by any stretch, no.
But you talk about the fear-mongering and how one's an opinion and one is science. But I don't see anybody coming to the table with a solution to help the fear-mongering. Right now you have mothers and fathers who are concerned about their children, as they should be and as I would be. But they keep coming back saying they've got the fear and you've got the science. Would it not be advisable for the science to try to offer up the same resources to the people so they could do their own study? Like, no one's going to believe an independent study. But if they did it themselves, well, maybe they haven't got the resources.
Okay.
So is the question for Maria, perhaps, around
Sure.
the science and the funding?
Do a quick response. There are numerous studies, independent, peer-reviewed, academic studies that evaluate exactly what you're talking about. There's a public database. I'm struggling. I think it's Genera. Struggling with the URL right now, but if you Google it, it's a public database that actually documents all of those studies, and you can find it. They're all available to download. Independently funded.
And to the point that we always have more to learn, and there's always new science coming out. How could we respond to that?
Sure, if I can jump in as well. So you're really talking about a question of trust. And did you walk here today?
No, I drove.
Okay, you drove. So you trust in that car, and the science could change on that car, or something could fail in that car. So this process of science is you have the best information that you have at that time. And yes, it absolutely can change. Now the question is, do we use the best information that we have and make decisions to go forward, or do we use the precautionary principle and shut down and, excuse the snarkiness, not come out from under our beds if we're really too scared of too many things? I put my faith in the fact that if it's repeatable, if I've seen it from that many scientists, I actually, shockingly, don't care where the funding comes from if it's repeatable. That's the magic of science, right? Now, do we want to have as much independent science as possible? Absolutely. But do we all want to pay for it ourselves out of our tax dollars? Sometimes, sometimes not. So, but the repeatability is very, very important, okay? So the same thing could be true of a newspaper that you respect. Currently, I'm not very happy with our president saying that the New York Times and the Washington Post is fake news. I can imagine there's other people here that feel the same way. But the New York Times and the Washington Post does take advertising. So can I trust them? Yes, because they have repeatability. They're not perfect, they're not infallible, but there's repeatability there. So I just want to distinguish between conflict of interest and perceived conflict of interest.
Thank you for your question. Can we pass the mic forward? Oh,
Or sideways.
sideways, perfect. He didn't actually have a question.
He's stretching.
We're going to figure this
sorry.
out. It's all good. Thanks, folks.
And it was a long film
Wonderful.
and a long Q&A, so if anybody ever needs to use the facilities, don't even hesitate, please. Just stand up and go.
Yeah,
I don't want you to
perfect.
feel trapped.
All right, the young man with the blue shirt on. Next question. Thank you.
Uh-oh, he's got notes.
Perfect.
I'll just go off.
You're fine. No, read your notes, brother. Read your notes. That's good that you took notes. That's awesome.
So my name's Colin. I am a current student at the University of Waterloo here. I study science and business, and I specialize in biotechnology. So this is obviously a certain passion of mine, my own passion being science communication in particular. And something that the film most certainly stressed, and of course all of our debates that we do have when we're engaging in conversations with genetically modified organisms, we do stress that we need to perceive the facts, and that is the most important thing. But as you also state in the film, people are very emotionally driven. They go by their gut feeling. And as you are portraying a lot of your points in the film, you try to go as much with your factual information as possible, but also you kind of know that if you can invoke some of those emotional responses, that can perhaps persuade people to understand that genetically modified organisms are very beneficial to us as well.
Yes.
So is that counterintuitive? Is that some
That's
irony in
storytelling.
there? Is that ethical to do, to try to still sway people with those emotional arguments, or do we purely go by the facts, even though it might be inefficient to do so, but it could perhaps be the most ethical way to go about the debate?
It's an excellent question. I hope other panelists will chime in. One of the nicest compliments I had of the film was from Alison Van Inneman in the film, who has been who's this wonderful science communicator and has been trying to lower the fear around GMOs, tell the truth around GMOs for about 20 years. And she was so happy with the end result of the film. And she does intros where she says, if I made this film, it would be all the data in a straight line, telling all the truth of the data. And it would be absolutely ineffective, and people would be asleep in about 20 minutes. And she's very grateful for the fact that I'm not a scientist, I'm a storyteller and a journalist and a father and all these things. So yes, your point is very valid. We're making a film that is pointing out the natural reasons that we use emotion to make decisions, and the dangers of using emotions to make decisions. At the same time, as a storyteller, emotion is an incredibly important part of how I tell a story. So all I can do is do my best to balance those two things and hopefully try and get it right. My definition of a documentary is the adaptation of the truth. And some people might say, what do you mean adaptation? It's the truth, isn't it? And there's no such thing as the perfect truth as in terms of storytelling or journalism. It's always going to be an adaptation. I decide who I talk to, I decide who I not talk to. I decide where I put music in, I decide where I not. But I still have to stand on my integrity as a journalist and as a father, that I'm trying to tell the whole nuanced truth as best I can. That's all I can do.
And in terms of emotion as well, it's not just, I think what we've heard from talking with Motlatsi is sometimes a sense of frustration too. And I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit to that, Motlatsi, around your frustration that you're facing at home.
The main frustration is climate change is a reality. We are experiencing droughts and floods. In 2016, when you came to make the film, we had the drought. But last year, we had rivers and dams full, but not in the Western Cape. You may have seen over the news today that maybe by the end of this week, Cape Town won't have water. They're trying to desalinate. Every person or a household must use only 25 liters of water per day. Those restrictions are products of climate change. You are very fortunate in Canada. I've seen you've got heaps of stores of water in the form of snow, and you're still gonna have more during your rain season. It's not the case in Africa. We're experiencing droughts and floods. And there's a new pest called an armyworm. I'm in my 60s. I've been into agriculture, commercial farming all my life. But I only saw this armyworm once. It was in 2015. So there are new species, pests, that we do not know. And of course, some birds that I love, which were not around my area. So it's a frustration, and partly happiness to be seeing. I was praising a moth that I was seeing for the first time, and during the very same year, it was in 2007, I was happy to see that moth spits, not a moth, a wasp. And I even had a small prayer to say, thanks God to introducing this species to me during my lifetime. And about 3 months later, I was an exhibitor at the showground, walking around in one booth. Here is this species on a pamphlet, and it's written that if you see one, report it to the police. So it was a criminal that I was happy to witness. Yeah, so yeah, frustration.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? And don't forget, if you have an index card and you'd like to write down a question instead.
Do we have more than one mic?
There's one there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, since I already have the microphone. Sorry. So I was glad that it was mentioned in the film that, you know, we've been doing genetic modification for, you could argue, for thousands of years based on crossbreeding and the like. But the problem that I see with not the physical application of GMO itself, but isn't the problem with all of these viruses that wipe out, you know, the entire extent of these crops is because of that crossbreeding, we've developed, like, essentially the problem was monoculturing, right? The crossbreeding resulted in a strain that was predominantly used as a seed form in all of these farms, and then doesn't the GMO just supplement one form of monoculturing with another? Like, obviously there's always a risk of new infections that wipe out the entire yield of the crop, but, and, you know, the prevalence of the market with the IP and stuff, it's common if there was a strain, then only the GMO crop that was first developed would end up replacing it, and so we end up getting the same problem where there's a lack of genetic variability. So if there's another, you know, infection of some kind, aren't we kind of left with the same problem?
And what do you do?
Sorry, my name's Grant. I'm a biochemist here. I'm in my last term.
So do you have a problem with all monocultures?
I don't have a problem with all monocultures. Just I'm just saying on a global scale, obviously, I know you're trying to pigeonhole me into...
No,
okay.
pigeonhole. I'm just trying to get clarity on what the word monoculture, because people put monoculture down and go, boom, monoculture.
Right.
Gotcha. So I'm just asking if you're pigeonholing us. So
No.
And I'd like to hear
wine,
from Greg, too.
citrus,
Well, I
monocultures.
know that even non-GMO crops are completely monocultured as well. I'm just saying that GMOs don't eliminate this threat in its entirety, and
Okay.
we shouldn't just apply GMO as a catch-all.
So, yeah. Would you like to
Can-
respond?
Greg, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, the answer is yes, right? So no, absolutely not. We shouldn't rely on GMOs to solve all problems, and no, GMOs are not the cause of all our problems. We have a production system across the world, and it's different across the world. I can speak to what we do in Ontario and what I do on my farm, that we grow corn, wheat, and soybeans. Have those crops changed from what their original heritage would have been? Absolutely. Has the yield increased in growing corn from maybe at 20 or 30 bushels per acre to 180 or 200 bushels an acre? Yes, but that's been done through conventional breeding. So that has nothing to do with GMOs. That's just how we've done natural selection and breeding of the crops to get those yields. When we add a trait to the crops like corn or soybeans, it's a production tool. So when we use it, we then have the option to then control something else. So with Roundup Ready, if we grow Roundup Ready corn or Roundup Ready soybeans, if I have weeds in the field, I have that option to use Roundup as a control measure to control that. I don't have to. It's an assessment that you can make, and I make the assessment first to say, do I need to plant the seeds that do have the trait in it, and then that option's available or not. And so those decisions are made every year on an annual basis as we make our cropping plans for the year. So I don't know if I 100% addressed your monoculture question, but that's from my perspective, not necessarily an issue that has anything to do with genetic modification.
Thank you. I want to turn it to the people up at the top balcony.
There's a balcony?
Yeah, there's people up there. Can you see them?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Don't throw anything.
Are there questions up there? Oh, no.
When is this going to end?
Yeah, actually, I have a question.
Someone's there. Can you say your name for us?
I'm Rachel. I'm a biology student here.
Awesome.
And as a scientist, I know a lot of the mechanisms behind GM and a lot of the methods. So safety-wise, I'm not really worried as far as human health goes, but my issue is with patenting. So, for example, all genes used to be, when we were just first discovering the genome, genes used to be patented, and the people that actually cloned the BRCA1 gene, they patented it, and this is one of the genes for hereditary breast cancer. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But because they patented it, they also had patent for the test, and so this test that could have saved a lot of lives it cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So by patenting these seeds and reserving them as intellectual property, are we not kind of minimizing the effects that this kind of life-saving and this technology that has the ability to feed the world, are we not kind of limiting the effectiveness of it?
Great.
Sure.
Maria, perhaps? So,
Sure.
not if you don't want to.
I'm not a legal expert. Actually did my PhD in biology here at Waterloo in genetics. So it's a great question. It's a great ethical question. You're absolutely right. It's independent of the discussion around the safety of these technologies. I think there are a couple of different factors at play here. Patent protection provides is essentially assurance of a return on investment. To get a new product to market, say a new corn trait, whatever, costs millions of dollars, and companies will need some assurance that they're going to get a return on that investment if they're going to put the money into R&D and to put the product through the regulatory approval process to get approval in Canada, the United States, Europe, or wherever. But a lot of these technologies that you're talking about that have promise for the developing world are being developed at universities. They're being developed outside of corporate labs, and they're not going to be sold at a massive profit. They're not looking. It's a different ball game, and so I'm not sure about the intellectual property situation for those, although I'm fairly certain that there are implications. But I don't think you can let concerns around that confuse the argument around the safety or the applicability of those technologies to address very real problems in the developing world.
And if I can add on to that, similar to my point of not trying to pigeonhole you with monocultures or with patenting, but monocultures and patenting, as Allison says in the film, is a version of whack-a-mole that we've had in this discussion around this. And my response for both of these are you against all patenting? Is all patenting bad? Or would we not have some technologies like this if there wasn't patenting? And there's patenting in organic farming, and there's patenting. So let's not just use patenting as a blanket of bad or misuse. You brought up a very specific example, I'd have to look into it further to follow it all the way through, of an imperfect way that patenting was used. Case by case. So think twice, look at each situation case by case, and not just use one example of patenting or monocultures to say, this is all bad.
I have a question here from the audience. Someone wrote down, what is being done to prevent the GM plants from pollinating the natural fauna? Is there a risk that GM plants could outcompete with natural foliage?
Hi, Mr.
Can anyone
Farmer.
respond to this? Yeah,
Yeah.
Motlatsi.
Farmers.
Having been growing yellow and white maize in South Africa, I think if we didn't try and champion the issue of contamination or cross-pollination, we couldn't have been having either white or yellow maize, because they will always cross-pollinate and destroy the quality. And I think the very same approach we're using to produce white or yellow maize next to our neighbors is effective enough to be continued.
Thank you. I'll take one more from the audience here. Yeah, sure.
Good evening. My name is Doug Bauman, an engineer and a scientist. I have a commercial affiliation with Big Ag as well as prior academic affiliation with Big Pharma. And I'm curious about, in your storytelling lifetimes, if you've succeeded in doing something that I've abjectly failed at, which is to push the cognitive dissonance button with your audience who happily accepts medical biotechnology, which is acutely life-saving, but has great difficulty in accepting agricultural biotechnology, which is chronically life-saving. And so I've tried to paint that picture in my life, because I feel like, how can you have one but not the other? And I'm curious if you've ever pulled on those threads in your professional or private dealings.
And Carol as well.
Good question.
Perhaps speak to this, yeah.
Thank you. And that question is related a bit to the students' question about the emotional aspect. And there are 7 billion people in the world, and each one of us has a different genetic makeup. And this is something that even siblings, the siblings we know this, are people who were born as, say twins. So I think we should always expect that people are going to have an emotional reaction to any kind of, call it manipulation of genetic material for whatever purposes that may be. What we have here, as Nathaniel Johnson said in the movie, is we have the capacity to decide how to use this technology. And if we want to patent it or not, then that's something as a society that we have the right to get involved in. With respect to the medical applications, typically for genetic modification, we see that in the pharmaceutical area. But the difference there from, let's say, an emotional point of view is that the risk is often assumed by the person who is taking that particular pharmaceutical. In the agricultural world, there's a feeling that the risk is disseminated, that there could be environmental risk, there can be cross-contamination. And as with respect to safety, when it comes to having any of these particular genetic crops, say, approved by regulatory authorities, they never say it's safe. And to the man's question about what something's going to happen in a clinical trial, that's very unfortunate that happened to you, but that was, 25 years ago, and now there are ethical review boards to make sure that something like that doesn't happen. And if it does happen, often there are outliers. So we have moved forward because of that particular incident or something like that happening to you. So whenever we have here this idea of safety, they never say something safe is safe. They just say that there's no objection. You never get a letter of safety. You just get what's called a LONO, letter of no objection, because they're always holding out for the time where, yes, there might be some new science, some new facts, and they will, as Allison says in the movie, then they will change their opinions. They'll change their conclusion because of the new evidence. In the work that we do in terms of regulatory compliance, the bar is getting higher and higher all the time. There are more and more tests that are being asked of the regulatory authorities. We're finding results where there were no results before because the diagnostic tools are more precise. So we are moving in towards a safer environment, a safer world.
And on that topic of environment too, this question from the audience came in as well to speak a little bit more towards bee health, bees and pollinators. Can we kind of touch on that a little bit, perhaps, Maria?
Any aspect of bee health in particular?
Well, okay.
It's a large
It's a
umbrella.
big topic.
Current understanding, if or what role GMOs or pesticides have, GMOs/pesticides have on bee health.
Certainly. So I'm going to talk predominantly about honeybees because they're the one bee species that we actually do know a huge amount about. There's hundreds of pollinator species out there, most of which have not been studied in any great detail. Honeybees, probably the one species that has been studied extensively for a number of reasons. Interestingly, Statistics Canada has been tracking Canadian honeybee numbers since the mid-1920s. We hit a record number of honeybee hives yet again in 2017 for the number of honeybee hives kept across Canada. So the first thing to note is that honeybee population numbers in Canada have never looked better, a testament to the strength of the beekeeping industry in this country and the great job that beekeepers do in keeping bees healthy. There's been a lot of research into the potential impacts of biotech crops and pesticides on bee health. They should be separate discussions. There's absolutely zero evidence that currently cultivated biotech crops in Canada pose any risk to bee health, and I can use this expression with this audience, and our comms team won't go nuts at me. They usually hate me saying there's no biologically plausible link between declining or impacts on bee health and GM crops. It just isn't. Pesticides are a little different. Bees are an insect. Insecticides are a subclass of pesticides that are designed to kill insects. If bees are exposed to an insecticide, they'll likely be killed. The challenge is, can we use pesticides and insecticides specifically in a way that does not pose an unacceptable risk to bee health? And I think the answer there is an overwhelming yes. We have a huge history of success in demonstrating that beekeepers and farmers can work together in a way that protects crops from insect damage and promotes bee health. The bee numbers in Canada are one example of that. One question I always get asked is around neonic insecticides and neonic seed treatments. Probably the easiest demonstration of how effective neonic seed treatments are at protecting bee health is in canola in Western Canada. Canola is a biotech crop, actually predominantly grown as a biotech crop. It's an incredibly melliferous crop, which is a fancy way of saying bees love it. It's very attractive to them. And 99% of the acres of canola that are grown in Western Canada are treated with a neonic seed treatment. If we track honeybee numbers in Western Canada against acres of canola planted, the two lines do this. It's a not perfect correlation, but it's a very strong correlation. If you talk to beekeepers, and I talk to a lot of beekeepers, they'll tell you they actively seek out areas of Canada where canola is grown because it is such a good crop for bees. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, we have a lot of data to understand the potential impacts of biotech crops and pesticides on bees. The story in Canada is incredibly good. We have a long, positive history of working together.
Great, thank you. Can I get a show of hands of how many people have questions out here? Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to take some more from the audience.
Very strong on
yeah.
You can.
And okay, but where is the mic right now? There's the mic. Okay. Sure, we'll take your question.
Okay, thanks. I'm John Kelly. I'm Vice Chair of Life Ontario, and I wear a number of other hats.
Vice Chair of what? Sorry, you cut out.
I'm Vice Chair of Life Sciences Ontario, and I also wear a lot of other hats. Okay. One of the things I think this film does is it points out the problems with scientific illiteracy that we have in society. Mm-hmm. We have a really learned group here. We've got lots of university students, but the majority of the populations that are making these decisions, whether it's with their vote or whether it's like the Hawaiian council members, they don't have that background. They don't have the capacity or the scientific training or the ability to make those critically important decisions based upon science. Right. I think this does a great job of talking to everybody here. How do we get that message out to those who don't really get it, who don't understand it? It's a question of messaging, and it's going to impact farmers all around the world.
Thank you for your question. Can you pass the mic forward as well to us? All right.
I'll start. One of the best things that ever happened to the film was getting Neil deGrasse Tyson to say yes to doing the film, and he's in all of his amazing ways as a science communicator. He was the first person to point out to me the importance of not just supporting science education at every level that we do now, and we can support it further, but exactly what your point is, supporting the fact that we need to teach the scientific method in not just to use in the science classroom, but to use in all aspects of society, in the way we think critically about all aspects of ways we make decisions. So we are, sorry to make it about the film for a minute, we are very excited over the next year that we are going to be getting into more schools in the United States and around the world, and we really hope that that will help underline that. But that's a big push that we want to have. If anybody else wants to chime in.
Any other, maybe a reaction from one other panel member?
There was a similar question that was raised last night. One of the other panel members, it was Ian Affleck from CropLife, had the answer of taking the examples that are in the film, and as Scott was saying, teaching people to think critically. And this is, I think, the way that the school system is going. And people saying, well, is it really reasonable to expect that genetically modified crops would increase autism like that? That typically you would expect someone to sit back and say, well, I think there's something wrong with this, so let's take another look at it. And that is, I think, of the kind of, like Scott was saying, critical thinking that we should have everybody try to incorporate into their particular lives. But we don't have, to your point, a scientific literate society. And these are scientific arguments, and I think the best we can do is just keep trying to give as many examples as possible. We know that from working in the food industry and putting information on labels, there's a limit to how much people can understand. But that doesn't mean we can stop. I think films like this are a very good way to reach a wide public.
Thank you. I have a question for Greg here. It's quite a long one, so I hope you don't mind me trying to...
Sorry, no, I was getting ahead of myself. If you got the mic yet, go ahead.
Trying to sort of synthesize it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But the question is around Monsanto or large ag tech companies and their control within the food system. So for the example that this person asks is that they are able to insert genetically coded instructions in some of their products, for example, to terminate after 1 year, so that farmers have to keep going back to them year after year, contrary to naturally grown plants. And we know that corporations have a legal mandate to pursue profits above all else. So how do we sort of reconcile this, or how do you both, as farmers, I guess, respond to this?
Sure. No, good question. I think part of they're referring to, at one point there was a terminator gene that some companies were trying to create, and that it would only allow a crop to grow for 1 year. That never came to market. The reality is I buy new seed every year because there's good merit in doing that in a cropping system to have the best quality seed. Seed is expensive. I want to make sure that I get a good germination. That's something different than what happened when my grandfather farmed, right? He kept his own seed, he grew it, but the yields and the crops they were growing are different. Some of the crops that we grow, like corn, is a hybrid. So in order to make the seed, you have a male plant and a female plant, and you cross these two specific plants to make the progeny, and that progeny is what we plant, and it's very predictable in what the outcome of how that crop is going to grow. So as far as corporate control, I always look at it this way from a farmer's perspective. They actually want to sell to me more than I need to buy from them. And so I actually have the control over what I buy and what I plant in my fields. And absolutely, there's lots of fancy marketing campaigns and things for me to think about it. But what I do, right, is I actually look at the science. I look at how do these different varieties and these different crops perform in a wider geography in my local area and on my farm. So if there's a new variety or a new crop coming out, I won't switch 50% of my production to that new fancy thing. I'll try 2 or 5%. I'll try a little bit and see how it performs on my farm. I'll try it in two or three different places. And if I find that it works and it's better, then I can make the decision that, yeah, that's going to work on my farm and that's what I want to adopt. But from a control perspective, I have more control than the multinationals or the seed companies have over what I plant on my farm.
I'll call it your question as maybe the issue of safe seed style of farming, where people must have freedom to choose a crop in the fields to store, to replant during the next season. Am I right? Yeah, okay. Now, that system, I don't know why people continue to push farmers to exercise that. Because in Kenya, for instance, it has been found that by choosing a crop from the fields, you are actually saving something that is harmful to you because the maize is infected with so-called maize lethal necrosis. So the scientists trying to introduce a new kind of seed, a drought-tolerant one, are afraid to give it to the farmers because farmers do not want to get rid of that saved seed. So that's where contamination that you were asking about may have an impact. Their saved seed will affect the drought-tolerant one, which could save us in that drought-prone continent. And again, having been into commercial farming from a very young age, underage, I don't remember even on a single year in more than 40 years where my boss would say we should choose seed from the fields. We always, every year, we would go and buy seeds, fertilizers, and diesel. And then again, looking into biotechnology, and with my learned son, who's now in a biomedical school, he's working in a laboratory now. We always compare ourselves with all other living organisms, including the maize that we plant, to say, as human beings, we have children. We were born from parents who were vaccinated, and why don't they exercise the same system of safe seed style of farming by not taking us to the doctor for another vaccination? And we continued to vaccinate until our grandchildren. If safe seed style of farming was correct, I think it will be right for us not to take our children for vaccination because they are born from us and we are immune to this environment. So I think my son gave me a very good example. If you want me to save seed and not buy, don't take your children for vaccination.
She got the mic.
Oh, yes, wonderful.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and I work in food processing innovation, so farther down the agricultural spectrum. And I did grow up on an industrial farm in southern Ontario. And it's my understanding that a lot of the GM debate is around pesticides and the use of heavy chemicals, but a lot of non-GMO crops use heavy pesticides. And even as someone that has a little teeny bit of information in this, I get very confused because I'm quite sure that organic crops also use chemicals as well. And I'm curious, maybe Maria and Carol can speak to the one level of investment in organic chemicals and what kind of ongoing research is done so that there's continual improvement, because I feel like it's less investment than is done in the larger crops and in traditional industrial agriculture. And then two, what is this, like, where do I go to find more information, accurate information on the types of chemicals used on organic crops? Because I know that it's on there, and I don't know how to translate that to other people who think GMO-free equals organic, and that's not true at all.
Thank you for your question.
Sure, I can start if you want. And jump
And that
in.
will be the last question of the evening, everybody. Thank you. That was dense. That was very good.
I guess the first point to make is, yeah, you're absolutely right. Organic does not mean chemical-free, pesticide-free. Organic crops are treated with pesticides and fertilizers, but they're pesticides and fertilizers that meet the Canadian organic standards. Those pesticides are not, they're not subject to a different regulatory system. They go through the same federal regulatory approval process that a conventional pesticide would. It means it's evaluated for potential impacts on human health, on the environment, and it has to, the same as a conventional product, meet the federal regulatory standards. It means the product can be used without an unacceptable risk to human health or the environment. So there's absolutely no concern with respect to either organic or conventional products that they pose, one or other poses a greater or lesser risk to human health or the environment. With respect to what those products are, and where you can find out more information about them, all of the data summaries are published by the federal regulator. I don't recommend necessarily trying to search their website. It's possibly one of the most user-unfriendly websites out there. But it's all there, and if you want to follow up afterwards, I'm happy to send you links. In terms of investments in them, I don't know. Companies are continually innovating, continually investing. There's a big market in organic, there's a big market in conventional, so in terms of absolute dollars, I have no idea. That's not public information, but companies are continually innovating. The most important thing to encourage them to innovate is to ensure that the regulatory system through which they're going to have to submit their product for approval is predictable, transparent, and risk-based, which fortunately we have in Canada. And we have a regulator that's world-renowned for doing a great job. Did you want to jump in? And
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have certified organic laws here in Canada, and really all of the countries that have laws which govern an organic certification stem from the UK, where the organic process first started. And there are inclusive lists and exclusive lists as to what can be used in organic farming, and these are chemicals and fertilizers, etc. So as to what can be used, that's written into the legislation. As far as investment, there is investment in all the different types of agriculture. There's conventional, there's identity preserved, organic, and conventional. I would say that since I've been watching the sector, which is the 25 years that I've been really involved in regulatory approval, there has been more and more development of I want to use the word scientific approach to organic farming. When organic farming started, a lot of it was trial and error. And universities have slowly and gradually taken on diploma and degree courses in organic farming, which the sector has needed, rather than this trial and error. Having said all that, as Maria said, we still have very high safety standards. The fact that someone might be an organic farmer and trying something is no reason for them to be producing unsafe food. So there's no concerns about one particular type of food being more safe than the other. They all have to pass through the same safety hurdles.
Thank you for that. We have time for one or two more questions. If there's a lot of enthusiasm for more questions, we'll kind of extend it beyond 10 p.m., but if you do need to go at 10 p.m., we'll take one or two more questions. Up in the balcony.
And there's a gentleman.
Oh, not on.
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, I'm Nadine Anderson. I'm a fourth-year student at the University of Guelph in a crop science degree. And I'd just like to say the movie was awesome. We touch a lot on, like in the past 4 years of my degree, we've touched a lot on the importance of communication between producers and consumers. And so I'd just like to say thanks for that. But my question is for Scott, and it's how did you decide who you were going to interview, and how did you get in contact with farmers around the world, I guess?
Oh boy, that's a great question. We did over 250 Skype interviews just for research as we were deciding on where we were going to go with this. Some of the big influences on the film, and sorry, a quick shout out to the previous question about places you can go to try and get answers. I will point you to the Berkeley Wellness Letter that's featured in the film. They're at the University of California, Berkeley, in the center of the foodie movement and the organic movement, and they try to tell the truth the best they can. They have a group of doctors that vet the science for us and try and communicate back to us good information. Until somebody shows me evidence otherwise, I find them to be very trustworthy. Very hard to decide who we were talking to and who we were not talking to. So first you try and figure out what is the universe of the GMO conversation. Thankfully, there's not that many products on the market. And then you start looking at who is for it, who's against it. Amy Harmon is a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning writer for the New York Times, wrote an incredible long two-series piece on the Hawaii situation. And that really struck a chord with us, that this is telling the whole story. Actually, the way I normally make documentaries, I would have probably just told that Hawaii story and stayed there for a year and followed all those characters, but we wanted to tell the global reach of the story. So that's one big piece. That introduced me, also to the rainbow papaya. So then we meet Dennis. And then you start researching who are some of the successful people that are against these products, and you find Jeffrey Smith and Vandana Shiva and Food Babe and Andrew Kimbrell and things like that. So you dig further there. Some of them talk to us, some of them wouldn't talk to us. So you try, as a storyteller, you try and tell the complete story. Complete is a very difficult word, where you try and tell the full story, but you also do want to have, like in any good story and in life, you have protagonists and antagonists. You have people that you trust and people that you don't trust, and you try and find balance there. So it's a long process. Somebody introduced a stop motion film at the Sundance Film Festival once by saying the following, and it really connected with me in terms of the editing of a documentary. Forgive me if it offends, but he said making a stop motion film is like making love and being stabbed to death at the same time. And editing a documentary has a little bit of that contrast where it's so difficult. It's like 60 jigsaw puzzles and none of the pictures. But when it works, it's incredibly magical and satisfying. You guys didn't need to hear that story.
Another question from the audience. Yeah. Great.
Hello, my name is Semi. I'm a faculty at the School of Computer Science here. So my question is this. So every piece of technology fundamentally has good applications and bad applications. And that's true for science too. In the hands of good people, science can be a great thing. In the hands of bad people, science can be a bad thing. Like internet, as an example of technology, can be great to spread information, also misinformation. And I think the audience tonight heard a lot about, good applications of GMOs tonight and certain things that the public should not be afraid of. Mm-hmm. But as with every technology, that there should be some regulations. What are some rational fears we should have about GMOs? Some things that do concern you, some applications of GMOs that were bad, and in general, what concerns you about GMOs?
Excellent question.
Farmers, scientists?
Yeah, a good question. So honestly, nothing. Nothing concerns me because I have faith in our system, and our system is science-based. So if somebody tries to bring a product or a technology or a trait or something forward, we do have checks and balances in the system to say that is this good? Is this solving a problem? Is this working for us? And then I have faith in the rest of our community, right? So am I going to decide to use a trait or a crop or a gene or something on my farm that I'm not comfortable with? Absolutely not. I want to understand that there's an inherent need and it's solving a problem for me, or it's creating an opportunity for a product down the road. But I have complete faith in our regulatory system and our science system and how we vet a good science and bring it to the marketplace. So I actually don't have a concern with that.
And building on that, in Canada, our federal regulatory system has a catch-all piece of legislation that should a product not fit into a nice bucket where it's captured under the Pest Control Products Act or the Seeds Act or one of the other acts that would regulate an agricultural or a pharmaceutical GMO, for want of a better term. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act automatically captures it if it's not captured under another act. And that act doesn't limit itself to GMO or biotech applications per se. It captures anything that is considered an animate product of biotechnology that's not regulated under an equivalent act, which means even yeast used in brewing beer is technically subject to that piece of legislation. So in terms of our regulatory system being able to capture any possible biotech application, regardless of how the user intends to ultimately use it, I have absolute faith that the regulatory system is set up to address it.
And then, if I can just, oh, please, please, please.
Okay, thank you, son, for asking a farmer when we have an issue with your food. You know, most people ask mechanics when they get stuck with their vehicles, and they go to doctors when they're sick, but they never ask a farmer about their food. So thank you for doing that. The reason I love this modern biotechnology is because it's about interdependence. You know, during the Green Revolution, or conventional farming, we used to spray 100% of our fields, trying to knock the stalk borers out of the fields to keep our maize clean. But we realized later that we were fighting a losing battle. But we continued to try and save the food for you, produce healthy crops. When biotechnology came into being, the BT maize, it worked out better for me because I'm not spraying 100% of my fields, or should I say I'm not spraying at all. 20% of my maize is conventional, free for the very pest that I'm fighting to enjoy and not develop the resistance. So it is better than conventional, where I used to spray and I lost the fight. This one, I'm surviving interdependently with the pest. You get my point? Thank you.
Guys, do
And
we
the
not have
the last
no
tiny
fears?
piece, because I know it's long, is case by case, obviously, going forward. Like, it just because
Yeah.
we're saying that these GM products are safe, obviously each one coming forward needs to go through the testing, so. I have not found one.
I think the biggest threat is not the misapplication of GMO. I think the biggest threat would be people's apathy, even though we saw all these activists, is if people don't get involved in how to apply this particular technology. It is safe because people are involved, and we have regulations which govern the application of it. The day that we don't have the regulations to govern the application of the technology, that's when we have to really start asking the question that you're raising.
So, thank you. Thank you for that question. That was the last question before our 10 o'clock cutoff. But it seems that I want to give people an opportunity if they would like to go home. You can do that.
You must stay here.
At the same time, this is my favorite part of the evening, and getting to kind of dive into some of these issues is really valuable. So if you would like to stick around and ask us a few more questions, we can extend this for a few more questions, and we can also meet outside in the lobby after that.
Just because I'm an independent documentary filmmaker, I do have a handful of DVDs for sale that I can sell. Always be selling. Thank you very much.